The scrapyard called Kessel's Drift was not a place anyone wanted to visit. It floated in a slow orbit around a gray, airless moon, far from the bright trade lanes where new ships gleamed and alien flags waved. Kessel's Drift was where old things went to die. Broken satellites, burned-out freighters, and rusted war machines from a dozen species sat in long rows, chained together under dim floodlights. The station smelled of hot metal and old oil, even through a sealed helmet, because that smell had soaked into every wall over 100 years. Elena Voss had worked there for 6 years. She was 29 years old, with short black hair and tired eyes, and she was good at her job. Her job was simple. Walk through the rows of dead ships, decide what could be melted down, what could be sold for parts, and what was truly worthless. It was not exciting work. Most days, nothing interesting happened at all. She had grown up on New Helios, the nearest human colony, a farming world with wide golden fields and quiet skies. When she was 18, she had left home to study engineering, hoping to build starships instead of just taking them apart. Life had other plans. After her father lost his farm to a bad harvest, Elena had needed steady work, and steady work meant taking whatever job paid the bills. Kessel's Drift paid well enough, even if the work was not what she had once dreamed about. She told herself it was temporary. She had been telling herself that for 6 years. Most of the other workers at the scrapyard were aliens, since humans rarely wanted jobs this far from home. There was Gret, a large reptilian mechanic who never spoke more than 3 words at a time. There was a pair of small floating creatures called the Wisps, who handled wiring, because their thin bodies could slide into places no one else could reach. Elena had learned to get along with all of them, and in a strange way, the scrapyard had become something like a family, even if it was a family made of forgotten metal and forgotten people. Today was different. She stood in front of a ship that had just arrived. It was long and gray, shaped like a blunt spear, with old human letters painted on the hull that had almost faded away. She could still read them if she tilted her head. US Vanguard. United Earth ship, she said quietly, running her glove along the cold metal. Vanguard. Her tablet buzzed. It was Dax, the station owner, a small furry alien from a species called the Threll. Dax had 4 arms, large black eyes, and a voice that always sounded like he was in a hurry, even when he was not. "You found it," Dax said through her earpiece. "The old Earth warship. Government auction. Very cheap. Earth does not want it anymore. Too old, too slow, too expensive to keep flying. Humans build shinier ships now." "How old is it?" Elena asked. 82 years, Dax said. "First ship humans built with a real jump drive. First ship that could fight outside your own solar system. A museum piece, but nobody wanted to pay for a museum. So here it is. Scrap." Elena looked up at the ship. 82 years was ancient for a warship. Most military vessels were replaced after 20 or 30 years, once their weapons and shields fell behind newer designs. A ship this old should have been retired decades ago, kept safe in a museum orbit somewhere, not sold to a scrapyard on the edge of nowhere. But Earth's government had been cutting its defense budget for years, ever since joining the wider community of alien species and signing treaties that promised peace. Old ships were expensive to store. New ships were what mattered now. The Vanguard had simply become a line item nobody wanted to pay for anymore. "Strange," Elena said. "A ship like this should be in a museum, not chained up next to a broken mining barge." "Strange is not my problem," Dax said. "My problem is turning metal into money. You have 3 days to catalog everything inside before the melting crew comes. Go inside, Elena. Tell me what is there." Elena sighed and opened the ship's outer hatch with an old manual crank, since the power had long been switched off. The door groaned like it was in pain. Cold, stale air rushed past her, air that had not moved in years. She switched on her helmet light and stepped inside. The corridors were dark and silent. Dust floated in her light beam. She passed empty crew quarters, a mess hall with bolted-down tables, and a medical bay with equipment so old it looked like something from a history book. Everything was still labeled in careful human handwriting, the kind of labeling that came from a crew who had cared about their ship. Along the way, she passed the ship's small armory, its racks empty now, the weapons long ago removed and sold separately by some earlier owner. She passed a row of escape pods, dusty but still sealed tight, each one large enough for 2 people. She found a plaque near the engine room door, half covered in grime, listing the names of the engineers who had built the ship's reactor core. She wiped the dust away with her glove and read each name slowly, wondering how many of them were still alive, and whether any of them knew their work was about to be melted down for scrap. She reached the bridge last. It was small compared to modern ships, with rows of manual switches instead of smooth touch panels. A captain's chair sat in the center, its leather cracked and gray. Elena sat down in it, just for a moment, and imagined what it must have felt like to command this ship when it was new and proud, sailing out to explore the stars for the very first time. This ship fought in the First Contact War, a new voice said behind her. Elena spun around, startled. An old man stood in the bridge doorway. He wore a faded jacket with a patch on the shoulder that matched the ship's name. He must have been at least 70 years old, with white hair and hands that shook slightly, but his eyes were sharp and clear. "Sorry to scare you," he said. "My name is Marcus Reyes. I served on this ship 40 years ago, when I was young. I heard it was being scrapped. I came to say goodbye." "How did you get past security?" Elena asked. Marcus smiled a little. "I know every trick this ship has. I know every trick this station has too. I have been coming to places like this for a long time, following old ships to their graves." Elena stood up from the captain's chair, feeling a little embarrassed, as if she had been caught sitting somewhere she should not sit. "This is a beautiful old ship," she said. "It seems like a waste to melt it down." "It is more than beautiful," Marcus said. His voice grew quieter, almost like he was talking to himself. "This ship was built during a war. Humanity almost lost. When the first aliens attacked us, over 80 years ago, humans had nothing. No jump drives. No shields that worked against alien weapons. We were losing. So Earth built this ship in secret, using every trick we had, using engineers who worked without sleep for months. The Vanguard was not supposed to win that war by having the best weapons. It was supposed to win by surviving what should have destroyed it. And it did. This ship took hits that should have killed everyone aboard, and it kept fighting. That is why they built it heavier and stronger than anything humans have built since. Modern ships are faster and shinier, sure, but they are not built like this one. Nobody builds ships like this anymore." Elena looked around the old bridge with new eyes. "What happened after the war?" "We won," Marcus said simply. "Barely. And then humanity joined the wider galaxy, made peace treaties, made friends with species that used to be strangers. Everyone wanted to forget the war. Everyone wanted new, clean, modern ships that looked friendly instead of like weapons. The Vanguard became an embarrassment, a reminder of a time everyone wanted to forget, so they retired it. And now here it is, about to be melted into scrap metal by aliens who probably do not even know what this ship is." "That's sad," Elena said. "It is what it is," Marcus said, though his voice suggested it hurt him more than he wanted to admit. "Old things get thrown away. That is the way of the galaxy." "What happened to the rest of the crew?" Elena asked. "The ones who served with you." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Some died in the war. Some moved on, and became something else. Farmers, teachers, quiet people, who never spoke about what they had seen. A few of us kept following ships like this one, from auction to auction, trying to save what we could. We never managed to save very many. Governments do not like paying to store old warships, and museums only have room for 1 or 2. Most of my old crewmates are gone now, in one way or another. I am one of the last who still remembers what the Vanguard really was. What was it really?" Elena asked, "besides a warship." Marcus thought about the question for a long time before answering. "It was proof," he said finally. "Proof that humans could build something strong enough to survive a war we should have lost. Proof that we were not as weak as the aliens who attacked us believed. Every rivet in this hull was placed by someone who refused to give up. That is worth more than scrap metal prices, if you ask me. But nobody is asking me anymore." Elena spent the next 2 days cataloging the ship, and Marcus stayed to help her, walking through the corridors and telling her stories about each room. The engine room, where he had fixed a broken coolant line during a battle, using nothing but tape and prayer. The mess hall, where the crew had celebrated the end of the war, with the last cans of real food anyone had left. The gunnery deck, where his best friend had died, defending the ship from an alien fighter squadron. By the third day, Elena felt like she knew the ship almost as well as Marcus did. She had also learned something important. Despite its age, the Vanguard's core systems were not actually broken. They had simply been shut down and left dormant. The reactor was intact. The hull plating, thick and heavy by modern standards, showed no serious damage. Even some of the old weapon systems still had power routing that looked usable, if someone bothered to check. This ship could still fly, she told Dax on the third evening, standing in front of the melting crew's schedule board. It's not actually broken. It's just old and out of fashion. Dax's forearms crossed impatiently. Old and out of fashion is exactly what scrap means, Elena. Nobody wants to buy an antique warship. I already have a buyer for the metal. Good price. We start melting tomorrow. Elena wanted to argue further, but she had no real reason to stop him. The ship belonged to the scrapyard now, fair and legal, bought at auction from Earth's own government. There was nothing illegal happening. Just something that felt wrong, deep in her chest, though she could not quite explain why. Could we at least ask Earth to take it back? She tried. Offer to sell it to a museum instead? I already asked, Dax said, his voice softening just slightly. No museum wants to pay shipping costs for something this large. No government wants to admit they sold a piece of their own history for scrap. Everyone would rather forget this ship exists than pay to remember it properly. I am sorry, Elena. I know you like this old thing. But business is business, and I have workers to pay. Elena nodded slowly, understanding even if she did not like it. She walked away from the melting schedule board with a heavy feeling in her chest. The kind of feeling that comes from watching something important disappear and being unable to stop it. That night, she could not sleep. She kept thinking about the ship sitting out there in the dark, its metal skin holding 82 years of history, about to be turned into raw material for something forgettable. She thought about Marcus's stories, about a crew who had fought and bled and survived, using a ship that nobody today would even recognize as a warship, since it lacked the sleek curves of modern designs. She got up and made herself a cup of tea, then sat by her small window, looking out at the endless rows of dead ships lit by dim floodlights. Somewhere out there, the Vanguard waited in its chains, unaware that tomorrow, the melting crew would begin cutting it apart, piece by piece, until nothing remained but raw metal, ready to be sold. Elena found she could not accept that, even though she had no power to stop it. She told herself she would talk to Dax again in the morning, though she doubted it would change anything. She was still awake, staring at the ceiling of her small quarters, when the alarms began. They were not the quiet, routine alarms of the scrapyard, the kind that went off when a piece of debris drifted too close or a docking clamp failed. These alarms were loud, sharp, and urgent, the kind used only for real emergencies. Elena jumped out of bed and pulled up the station's sensor display on her wall screen. Ships were approaching. Many ships. Their shapes were sharp and jagged, painted in dark colors, moving in tight formation, the way only military fleets moved. Elena's stomach dropped as she read the sensor tags scrolling across her screen, automatically translated by the station's computer. Skarn Dominion warships, 12 of them, maybe more, closing fast from the direction of New Helios, the nearest human colony world. The Skarn Dominion was not friendly. Everyone in this part of space knew that. They were a warlike alien empire that had been expanding for decades, conquering smaller species and taking their worlds. Earth had signed a defense treaty with the closest alien alliance for protection, but that alliance fleet was stationed many light years away, far too far to help in time. New Helios, with its 250,000 human colonists, had almost no real military defense of its own. It relied entirely on the promise that the Dominion would never dare attack a world under alliance protection. That promise, it seemed, had just been broken. She skidded to a stop at the corridor junction, watching for a moment as families and workers hurried past her toward the shelter bay, carrying whatever small belongings they had managed to grab. A pair of wisps drifted overhead, their thin bodies glowing faintly with fear. Gret the mechanic ran past her, moving faster than she had ever seen him move, calling out for anyone still in the maintenance tunnels to get clear. The whole station had turned into chaos in a matter of minutes, and Elena understood, with a cold feeling in her stomach, that Kessel's drift had no defenses at all. It was a scrapyard, not a fortress. There were no shields, no weapons, Nothing but old dead ships and frightened workers waiting to see if the Dominion fleet would bother stopping to destroy them. Elena's comm buzzed. It was Dax, and his voice had lost all of its usual hurried calm. It was shaking. Elena, get to the shelter bay, now. The Dominion fleet is not stopping at New Helios. Some of their ships changed course. They are coming here. Why would they attack a scrapyard? Elena asked, pulling on her boots with shaking hands. I do not know, Dax said. Maybe they think we have military supplies. Maybe they just want easy targets before the real battle. It does not matter why. Get to the shelter bay, now. Elena ran through the station's corridors, joining a stream of frightened workers and traders, all heading the same direction. She passed a viewport and could not stop herself from looking out. Far in the distance, she could see flashes of light where New Helios must be, and closer, growing larger every second, the dark shapes of Dominion warships bearing down on the scrapyard itself. She thought of the Vanguard, sitting out there in its chains, powerless and dark, about to be caught in the crossfire of a war it had no part in. And then she thought of something else, something that made her stop running for just a moment, even as the alarms screamed around her. The Vanguard was not actually broken. She turned around and started running in the opposite direction, toward the docking bay where the old ship waited, ignoring the shouts of people telling her to go the other way. Behind her, through a viewport, she saw one of the outer defense platforms take a direct hit and burst into a silent ball of fire, debris scattering into the dark. Somewhere on the station, an emergency crew was shouting over the open comm channel about hull breaches on the lower decks. New Helios, far in the distance, was already burning, tiny orange lights blinking out one by one as the colony's few defense satellites were destroyed. She found Marcus already there, standing in front of the Vanguard's hatch, looking up at the approaching enemy ships with an expression she could not quite read. It was not fear. It looked almost like recognition, like a soldier hearing a war drum he thought he would never hear again. You felt it too, he said, without turning around. The reactor is intact, Elena said, breathing hard. The hull is intact. Some of the weapons might still work. Marcus, is there any chance? There is always a chance, Marcus said. And for the first time since she had met him, his shaking hands went still. Get me into that engine room. I know this ship better than anyone alive. If we are going to die out here, we are not going to die hiding. This old girl has one more fight left in her. I can feel it. Behind them, the scrapyard's alarms kept screaming, and the first Dominion warship opened fire on the outer defense platforms, lighting up the dark sky in terrible orange light. Elena looked at the old, gray, forgotten warship in front of her, chained up and dark, waiting like a sleeping giant. This will not be easy, Marcus warned, already moving toward the hatch. The reactor has been cold for years. Bringing it back online could take hours we do not have. The weapons have not been tested in decades. We do not even know if the life support still works properly. This might be nothing more than a very old, very heavy coffin. Then we had better hurry, Elena said, because a coffin is better than nothing, and right now, nothing is exactly what this station has to fight back with. Marcus allowed himself a small, tired smile, the kind of smile that belonged to a much younger man. You sound like a soldier already. I sound scared, Elena admitted. But scared and doing something is better than scared and doing nothing. Above them, through the docking bay's open outer doors, 3 Dominion warships broke formation and began descending toward the scrapyard itself, their weapon ports glowing an angry red as they charged for another volley. There was no more time to talk, no more time to doubt, no more time to wonder whether an 82-year-old ship, built for a war everyone wanted to forget, could possibly matter now. There was only the ship, dark and silent, and the 2 people standing in front of it, who refused to let it die without a fight. She reached out and pulled the manual crank on the outer hatch, the same hatch she had opened 3 days earlier, out of simple curiosity. This time, her hands were shaking not from fear, but from something else entirely, something that felt, strangely, like hope.
Then let's wake her up,
Elena said. Inside the Vanguard, the air was cold and dead, and the darkness pressed in from every side like a heavy blanket. Elena followed Marcus through the corridors, using her helmet light to guide the way, while outside the hull, she could feel the faint shudder of distant explosions rolling through the metal. The ship groaned around them, an old sound, like a giant slowly waking from a very long sleep. "Engine room," Marcus said, pointing down a side corridor. "That is where we start. Nothing works until the reactor works." They reached the engine room, a wide chamber filled with rows of dark machinery, thick pipes running along the ceiling, and a massive cylindrical shape in the center that Elena recognized as the ship's main reactor core. It was cold and silent, its status lights dark, looking more like a tomb than a source of power. Marcus moved to a control panel beside the reactor and began flipping switches with practiced hands. Despite the years that had passed since he last stood in this room, nothing happened. He tried again, checking connections, tapping at old readouts that stayed stubbornly dark. "The main power feed is dead," he said. "We need auxiliary power first, just to wake the startup systems. There should be a backup battery bank, 3 decks down, near the old crew quarters. It might still hold a charge, if we are lucky." "I'll go," Elena said. "You stay here and get ready." She ran through the dark corridors alone, her breath loud inside her helmet, the sound of battle outside growing louder with every passing minute. She found the battery room exactly where Marcus said it would be, a small chamber lined with thick metal cases. She pried one open and checked the readout with her wrist scanner. The charge indicator flickered weakly, showing only a small fraction of power remaining, but it was something. She dragged the heaviest battery case she could carry back toward the engine room, her muscles burning with the effort, sweat running down her back despite the cold air. By the time she returned, Marcus had opened a maintenance panel and exposed a tangle of wiring beneath the reactor controls. "Connect it here," he said, pointing to a set of terminals. "Careful. Reverse the polarity, and you will fry the whole startup circuit, and then we truly will have nothing but a coffin." Elena's hands shook as she made the connection, checking and double-checking the wiring against the faded diagram printed on the panel door. When she finished, she stepped back and nodded to Marcus. He flipped the main switch. For a terrible moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, a single status light on the reactor core blinked to life, glowing a dim orange. Then another. A low hum began to build somewhere deep inside the machine, growing steadily stronger, like a heartbeat returning to a body that had been still for far too long. "Yes," Marcus whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Come on, old girl, come on." Elena watched his face in the dim orange light and saw something she had not expected. Tears had gathered in the corners of his eyes, though his hands stayed perfectly steady on the controls. She realized, in that moment, how much this ship truly meant to him. It was not just metal and wiring, it was every friend he had lost, every year he had spent trying to save old ships that nobody else cared about, every piece of himself he had poured into a machine that the rest of the galaxy had decided was worthless. "You okay?" she asked quietly. "I am better than I have been in years," Marcus said, wiping his eyes with the back of his glove. 40 years I have waited to hear that sound again. I did not think I would ever hear it. Come on, focus. We have work to do." More lights flickered on across the control panel. The hum grew louder, turning into a steady mechanical rumble that Elena could feel through the deck plating beneath her boots. Somewhere above them, distant systems began to stir, emergency lighting flickering to life in the corridors outside, dim and orange at first, then brightening steadily. "The reactor is coming online," Marcus said, reading the display. "Slowly. Too slowly. At this rate, we will have partial power in 20 minutes. Full power in maybe an hour. We do not have an hour." "Then we work faster," Elena said. "What else needs power right now?" "Life support, so we do not suffocate. Basic navigation, so we are not flying blind. And weapons, if we actually intend to fight, instead of just floating here waiting to die." Marcus wiped sweat from his forehead despite the cold. "I cannot do all of that alone. I need more hands." Elena's comm crackled. It was Dax, and his voice sounded strange, caught somewhere between fear and disbelief. "Elena, what are you doing? Sensors are picking up power readings from the Vanguard. That ship should be dead." "It's not dead," Elena said. "It's just been sleeping. Dax, I need help. Anyone on the station with engineering experience. Anyone who is not already fighting fires or running for the shelter bay, send them to the Vanguard. We might be able to fight back." There was a long pause on the comm line. "Elena, that ship has not flown in 15 years. You cannot seriously believe two people can bring a warship back to life in the middle of a battle. We already brought the reactor online, Elena said. We don't have a choice, Dax. The shelter bay will not stop a warship's guns if the Dominion decides this station is worth destroying completely. Our only chance is if something out here can shoot back. Another pause, shorter this time. I am sending Gret and the Wisps, that is all I can spare. Everyone else is needed to keep the shelter bay sealed and the life support running there. Elena, be careful. And if this does not work, get everyone out of that ship before it becomes a coffin for real. Understood, Elena said, though privately she doubted there would be time to retreat if things went wrong. She turned back to Marcus, who was already elbow-deep in an open panel, tracing wires with a small handheld light clenched between his teeth. Dax is sending Gret and the Wisps, she told him. That's all we get. 4 hands and 2 mechanics who glow in the dark, Marcus said around the light in his mouth, not looking up. I have worked with less. During the war, I once brought a dying frigate back online with 3 crew members and a roll of tape. We will manage. You keep mentioning tape, Elena said. Is that really how you fixed a warship? Tape holds a coolant line together for exactly as long as you need it to, if you believe hard enough, Marcus said, finally looking up with a tired grin. Faith and tape, Elena. That is half of military engineering. The other half is knowing which wire not to touch. Despite everything, despite the explosions rumbling through the hull and the fear sitting cold in her stomach, Elena found herself almost laughing. It felt good, for just a second, to laugh in the middle of a battle. It felt like proof that she was still human, still herself, even as the world outside fell apart. Gret arrived first, ducking through the low doorway of the engine room, his reptilian face unreadable, but his hands already reaching for a toolkit strapped to his hip. He said nothing, simply moved to the nearest open panel and began working, exactly the way he handled every job at the scrapyard. The 2 Wisps arrived moments later, their glowing bodies drifting through the narrow maintenance shafts that no human or reptilian mechanic could fit into, disappearing into the ship's wiring to check connections human hands could never reach. With 4 sets of hands now working instead of 2, progress came faster. Marcus directed the effort like a conductor leading an orchestra, calling out instructions with the confidence of a man who had done this work before, even if it had been decades since he last touched these particular systems. Gret proved to be exactly the kind of worker the moment demanded, silent and steady, never once questioning an instruction, simply moving from task to task with the calm efficiency of someone who had spent years fixing things nobody else wanted to fix. The 2 Wisps communicated with each other in soft musical tones as they wound through the ship's inner wiring shafts, occasionally chiming a status update back to Marcus, who nodded along as though he understood their strange language perfectly, though Elena suspected he was mostly guessing from tone alone. How do you even know if they're telling you good news or bad news? Elena asked at one point, watching a wisp drift past overhead, glowing faintly blue. Blue is good, Marcus said. Orange is bad. Red means run. I learned that from working alongside their kind for 30 years. You pick things up. Life support first, he called out, then weapons. Navigation and shields can wait a few more minutes. If we cannot breathe or fight, nothing else matters. Elena worked alongside Gret, replacing old fuses with parts salvaged from other dead ships in the yard, parts she had cataloged herself just days earlier without any idea they would become this important. It was strange, she thought, how quickly a scrapyard full of forgotten junk had become a source of desperately needed spare parts. Every broken satellite, every burned-out freighter, every rusted piece of alien technology sitting in Kessel's Drift's long rows suddenly had value again, if only someone knew where to look. Outside, the battle continued to rage. Elena caught glimpses of it through occasional viewports as she ran between engine room and corridor, tracking down parts and running cables. Dominion warships moved through the scrapyard's outer rows, firing on anything that looked like it might be useful or dangerous, reducing decades of collected junk to burning debris. She watched one massive freighter hull, twice the size of the Vanguard, get torn apart by concentrated fire in seconds, its pieces scattering silently into the void. She thought about how close the Vanguard had come to that same fate at the hands of the melting crew, just hours from now if the attack had not come first, and felt a strange, cold understanding settle over her. If they failed here, the Dominion would finish what the melting crew had started. Either way, The old ship's story would end. The only question was whether it would end quietly, or whether it would end fighting. She ducked into a side corridor to avoid a shower of sparks falling from a damaged conduit overhead, and nearly collided with Gret, who was dragging a heavy cable spool toward the engine room. He grunted something in his own language, which the translator in her earpiece rendered simply as, "Move, small one," and she stepped aside to let him pass, grateful for his strength in a moment when her own arms had begun to ache from hours of hauling equipment. Through the comm channel, she could hear fragments of chatter from the station's shelter bay, frightened voices asking Dax whether help was coming, whether the Alliance fleet had been contacted, whether anyone out there even knew Kessel's drift existed. Dax's answers were calm but grim. The Alliance fleet was too far away. New Helios was fighting for its own survival and could spare no ships. Whatever happened next at the scrapyard, they would have to face it with whatever they could find among the wreckage of forgotten things. Life support online, one of the wisps reported, its voice a thin, musical chime translated through Elena's earpiece. Air quality acceptable, pressure stable. Good, Marcus said. Now the weapons. Elena, with me. They moved together toward the gunnery deck, a long chamber lined with old weapon control stations, each one connected to one of the ship's heavy cannons mounted along the hull. Marcus sat down at the first station, running his hands over controls that looked ancient compared to anything Elena had seen on modern ships. Thick mechanical switches instead of smooth digital interfaces. These cannons are old technology, Marcus explained as he worked. But old does not mean weak. This ship's main guns were built to punch through Dominion armor plating during the war, back when Dominion ships were the toughest thing flying. Modern human weapons are faster and more precise, sure, built to fight polite little skirmishes under Alliance rules of engagement. But these old guns were built for one purpose, to hit hard enough that it did not matter how many shots you got, because one hit was enough to end the fight. He tapped the side of the heavy cannon housing with his knuckles, and it rang with a solid, reassuring sound. The Dominion has not fought a real war in decades, not since the Alliance pushed them back to their own borders. Their newer ships are built for speed and show, for parading around and threatening smaller species who cannot fight back. I do not think they have faced anything built like this in a very long time. Maybe that will surprise them. Maybe it will not. Either way, we are about to find out. The console flickered, then steadied, showing a status readout that made Marcus grin, despite the danger surrounding them. Cannon 1. Online. Weak power, but online. Give me a minute and I will have Cannon 2 up as well. Elena moved to the second gunnery station, following Marcus's shouted instructions as she worked. Her hands moved faster now, more confident, muscle memory building even though she had never operated a weapon like this before in her life. There was something satisfying about the old, heavy switches, something that felt more real than the smooth touchscreens she was used to seeing on modern equipment. A deep tremor ran through the ship, and for a terrible moment, Elena thought they had been hit directly. Then she realized it was something else. The ship's engines, stirring for the first time in 15 years, testing their own strength as power flowed through systems that had been dormant far too long. That's the engines, Marcus said, a note of wonder in his voice. I did not think we would have those working this quickly. Somebody up there must be smiling on us. Or, somebody down here is just very good at their job, Elena said, glancing toward the corridor where Gret had disappeared with his cable spool. Marcus chuckled, a low, warm sound that seemed out of place amid the chaos outside. Both things can be true. Now come here and help me with Cannon 2. This next part requires 4 hands, and mine are getting old. Engines are responding, Marcus called out, checking a separate readout. Not full power, not even close, but responding. We might actually be able to move this old girl if we need to. Gret appeared in the gunnery deck doorway, his reptilian face showing what might have been the alien equivalent of a grim smile. He held up 3 fingers, then pointed toward the corridor leading to navigation. Elena understood immediately. Shields were coming online too, thanks to his work. Shields at 15%, Marcus confirmed, reading a new set of numbers. Not much, but better than nothing. Elena, I need you on navigation. Someone has to fly this thing, and it certainly is not going to be me. My hands do not have the reflexes for it anymore. I've never flown a warship, Elena said, panic creeping into her voice for the first time since the attack began. Neither had I, The first time I sat in that chair, Marcus said. You learn fast when the alternative is dying. Go, now. We are running out of time. Elena ran to the bridge, the same small room where she had sat in the captain's chair just days earlier, imagining what it must have felt like to command this ship in its glory days. Now she sat in the pilot station instead, her hands trembling as she studied controls that seemed impossibly complex, rows of switches and dials, with labels worn nearly illegible from decades of use. She forced herself to breathe slowly, remembering the flight simulations she had taken back in engineering school, years ago, before life had pulled her toward a scrapyard instead of a cockpit. The Vanguard's controls were older and clunkier than anything she had trained on, but the basic principles had to be the same. Thrust was thrust, steering was steering. She found the primary control stick and wrapped both hands around it, feeling the worn grooves left by decades of other hands before hers. "Talk to me, old girl," she whispered, echoing Marcus's words from the engine room. "I know you remember how to do this, even if I don't." Through the main viewport, she could see the battle raging outside. Dominion warships tearing through the scrapyard's outer defenses, explosions lighting up the darkness in flashes of orange and white. And closer, far too close, one of the Dominion ships was turning, its weapon ports glowing bright red, aiming directly at the docking bay where the Vanguard sat, still only partially powered, still nowhere near ready for a real fight. "Marcus," Elena called over the ship's internal comm, her voice tight with fear. "We have incoming. Direct fire, 30 seconds, maybe less." There was a brief pause, and when Marcus spoke again, his voice had changed. Gone was the tired old man who had come to say goodbye to a dying ship. In his place was something else, something Elena recognized from his earlier stories, the voice of a soldier who had survived a war everyone else had forgotten. "Then let's give them something to remember," Marcus said. "Cannon 1, ready. Cannon 2, ready. Elena, get us moving, even if it is just enough to dodge that first shot. This old ship has survived worse than one angry Dominion cruiser. Let's show them why." Elena's hands found the controls, and for the first time in 15 years, the UES Vanguard began to move. It was not fast, not graceful, not anything like the sleek maneuvers Elena had seen modern fighters perform in training videos. The old ship shuddered and groaned as it pulled away from its docking chains, metal straining against metal, the whole hull vibrating with the effort of motion after so many years standing still. But it moved, slowly, heavily. The Vanguard slid sideways, just as the Dominion cruiser's weapons fired, and the bright beam that should have struck the docking bay dead center instead tore through empty space where the ship had been only seconds before. "Direct hit missed," Marcus shouted over the comm, and Elena could hear the fierce grin in his voice even without seeing his face. "Nice flying, Elena. Now bring us around. Let's show them what these old guns can do." The Dominion cruiser that had fired on the docking bay banked hard, turning to bring its weapons to bear again, on the strange gray ship that had somehow dodged its first shot. Elena gripped the control stick tight, sweat running down the back of her neck despite the cold air still filling the bridge. "They're turning back toward us," she called out, "coming around fast." "Let them come," Marcus said from the gunnery deck. "Cannon 1 is charged. Give me a shot, Elena. Line us up." Elena studied the sensor display, a simple green outline showing the enemy ship's position relative to their own. She had never aimed a weapon at another ship before in her life, had never imagined she would need to, but her hands moved with a strange steadiness as she adjusted the Vanguard's heading, bringing the old ship's port side toward the incoming cruiser. "Now!" she shouted. Marcus fired. The Vanguard's old cannon released a bolt of energy, unlike anything Elena had ever seen a modern human weapon produce. It was not a thin, precise beam, like the weapons she was used to seeing in news broadcasts of Alliance ships in training exercises. It was thick and bright, almost like a spear of solid light, and it struck the Dominion cruiser's forward shields with a flash that lit up the entire battlefield. The cruiser's shields flared bright blue, straining under the impact, and for a moment, Elena thought the shot had simply been absorbed, wasted energy against a stronger enemy. Then the shields collapsed entirely, sparking and failing, and the cruiser lurched sideways, one of its engine pods trailing smoke. "Direct hit," Marcus shouted, triumph ringing in his voice. "Shields down. Their engine is damaged. Elena, I told you. One good hit is all this old girl needs. On the enemy ship, alarms must have been screaming just as loudly as they had been on the Vanguard only an hour earlier. The Dominion cruiser broke off its attack run, veering away, clearly no longer interested in a target that could return fire with that much force. It retreated toward the rest of its fleet, trailing damage, leaving the Vanguard alone in the space it had just claimed. Elena allowed herself a single breath of relief before the sensor display lit up with new warnings. 2 more Dominion ships were changing course, drawn by the sudden flash of weapons fire, curious about what had just damaged one of their own so badly. For a brief moment, she let her eyes drift toward the wider battlefield beyond the scrapyard, and what she saw made her chest tighten with dread. New Helios burned in the distance, a pale orange smudge against the black of space, its scattered defense platforms winking out one after another, like candles being snuffed by an invisible hand. Somewhere down there, on that colony world, were people who had grown up the same way she had, in the same golden fields, under the same quiet sky. She thought of her father, and hoped desperately that the fighting had not reached the farming districts yet. She pushed the thought aside. There was no time for it now. The scrapyard needed her here, and dwelling on New Helios would only slow her hands when speed was the only thing standing between the Vanguard and destruction. "We've got their attention now," she said. 2 more incoming." "Good," Marcus said. "Let them come too. Cannon 2 is charged. Gret, how are the shields holding?" Gret's voice came through the comm, translated into flat, mechanical tones by the ship's old system. "Shields at 20%. Holding. Recharging slowly." 20% is not much, Marcus muttered, mostly to himself. "We cannot take many direct hits at that level. Elena, keep us moving. A moving target is a hard target, even for Dominion gunners." Elena pushed the control stick, guiding the Vanguard through a wide, heavy turn, the old ship groaning with every degree of movement. It was nothing like the quick, sharp maneuvers she imagined modern fighters could perform, but it was enough to keep the ship from becoming an easy, stationary target. The 2 approaching Dominion ships split apart, one curving left, one curving right, clearly intending to catch the Vanguard in a crossfire. Through the bridge's main viewport, she could see the enemy ships clearly now for the first time. Sleek black hulls marked with jagged red emblems, built for speed and intimidation rather than durability. They looked nothing like the Vanguard's blunt, heavy shape, and for a moment Elena wondered if the old ship would simply look foolish next to such modern, aggressive designs. Then she remembered Marcus's words about armor, built to survive what should have destroyed it, and she gripped the controls a little tighter, trusting the ship beneath her rather than her own fear. "They're flanking us," Elena warned. "Standard Dominion tactics," Marcus said. "They like to surround a target and overwhelm it from multiple angles. It works well against ships with weak point defenses. Let's hope this old girl still has some fight left in her main systems." He paused, listening to something on his own console. "Cannon 2, fully charged. Elena, I need an angle on the left ship. Can you give me one?" Elena adjusted their heading again, watching the sensor display carefully, trying to predict where the enemy ship would be in the next few seconds, rather than where it currently sat. It was a strange kind of math, part instinct and part desperate hope, but she found the angle Marcus needed and held the ship steady just long enough. "Now," she called. The second cannon fired, another bolt of thick, bright energy tearing across the battlefield. This shot struck the left flanking ship along its side, and though the shields absorbed most of the impact, the force of it was enough to send the smaller Dominion vessel spinning off course, its formation broken. But the right flanking ship had used the moment to close distance, and its own weapons fired back, 3 sharp beams of red energy slicing through space toward the Vanguard's hull. Elena had no time to dodge. She braced herself, gripping the control stick tight, as the shots struck home. Time seemed to slow in that instant. Elena would later remember thinking, absurdly, of the plaque she had found near the engine room door just days before, the list of names of the engineers who had built this ship's reactor core. She wondered if any of them had imagined, all those decades ago, that their work would one day be tested like this, against a modern enemy, in the hands of a scrapyard worker who had never fired a weapon in her life. She hoped, in that fleeting second, that she would not be the one to fail them. The ship shuddered violently, alarms blaring across every console on the bridge. Sparks rained down from an overhead panel, and for a terrible moment the lights flickered and dimmed before steadying again. Shields at 5%. Gret's voice crackled over the comm, tension clear even through the flat translation. Hull integrity holding, but barely. Next hit will breach outer plating. We cannot take another shot like that, Marcus said grimly. Elena, we need to disengage, just for a moment. Enough to let the shields recharge. Pull us back. Elena tried to comply, pulling the control stick toward retreat, but the ship responded sluggishly, its damaged systems fighting against her every command. The right flanking ship was already circling back for another attack run, weapons charging for a killing blow. Come on, Elena muttered through gritted teeth, wrestling with controls that felt like they were fighting her back. Come on, move, please move. Behind her, she could hear Gret shouting something in his own language over the open comm, and one of the wisps chiming back frantically, their glow flashing between blue and a worried orange. Somewhere below decks, a small explosion rattled through the ship, followed by an alarm, indicating a secondary power conduit had failed. They were running out of margin, and everyone aboard knew it. It was in that moment, staring down what felt like certain destruction, that Elena remembered something Marcus had told her 3 days earlier, standing on the ship's dusty bridge before any of this had begun. This ship was not built to win by being the strongest or the fastest. It was built to survive what should have destroyed it. Marcus, she said, an idea forming quickly, desperately. The hull plating. You said it was heavier than anything built today. What if we don't dodge? What if we just take the hit? There was a pause on the comm line. That is either the smartest idea I have heard all day, or the last mistake we will ever make, Marcus said. But you might be right. This hull was built to absorb damage that would tear a modern ship apart. Gret, redirect all remaining shield power to the forward plating, the thickest section. Elena, turn us nose first into their attack. If the old designs held true, we can take it. Elena gritted her teeth and pushed the control stick forward, turning the Vanguard's reinforced bow directly toward the incoming Dominion ship, presenting the thickest, strongest part of the hull as a target, rather than trying to flee. It went against every instinct she had, every lesson about avoiding danger rather than facing it head-on. But she trusted Marcus, and more than that, she trusted the old ship beneath her hands. Brace for impact, she shouted through the ship's internal comm, hoping Gret and the wisps below decks had somewhere solid to hold on to. She thought, for one wild second, of Dax's words back at the station, about business being business and old things always being thrown away. She hoped, fiercely, that he was about to be proven wrong. The Dominion ship fired. The impact rocked the entire Vanguard, throwing Elena hard against her restraint harness, the sound of the explosion echoing through the hull like a giant bell being struck. Warning lights flashed red across every console, and for a heart-stopping second, Elena thought they had lost, that the old ship's armor had finally failed after 82 years of waiting. Then the alarms began to quiet, one by one, and Gret's voice came through the comm, filled with something close to disbelief. Hull holding. Outer plating scorched, but intact, no breach. Marcus laughed, a wild, joyful sound that Elena would remember for the rest of her life. She held. I told you, Elena. I told you this old girl was built different. Now give them something back. Cannon 1 is charged again. Let's finish this. Elena brought the ship around, lining up the shot with hands that were finally starting to feel steady instead of shaking, and Marcus fired. The bolt of energy struck the surprised Dominion ship dead center, its shields already weakened from its own reckless attack run, and this time the impact was enough to send the enemy vessel tumbling away, dark and powerless, definitely not coming back for another pass. For a moment, the space around the Vanguard was quiet. The two ships they had damaged retreated toward the main Dominion formation, and no new attackers moved to take their place, at least not immediately. Elena allowed herself to breathe, watching the sensor display for any new threats, her whole body trembling now that the immediate danger had passed. She let out a shaky laugh, the tension of the last several minutes draining out of her all at once, leaving her hands trembling against the controls. Through the comm, she could hear the faint sound of Gret saying something to the wisps that might have been a joke, followed by a soft musical chime that could only have been laughter. We did it, she said, half disbelieving her own words. We actually did it. We survived one skirmish, Marcus said, his voice more cautious now. though the joy had not entirely left it. "Look at the main display, Elena. This is far from over." Elena looked, and her stomach dropped. The wider battle around New Helios was still raging. Dozens of Dominion ships visible on long-range sensors, far more than the handful that had broken off to attack the scrapyard. The colony world itself was still under heavy assault, its scattered defense platforms falling one after another. And closer, several more Dominion ships were beginning to notice the strange old vessel that had just humiliated two of their own, turning their attention toward Kessel's drift, with what could only be read as anger. "They're regrouping," Elena said. "More ships coming, a lot more." She scanned the readout more carefully, trying to make sense of the enemy formation. The 6 ships were not identical, she noticed. 4 of them matched the design of the 2 cruisers they had already fought, fast and lightly armored. But 2 others were larger, heavier, moving with a slower, more deliberate pace that suggested serious firepower rather than mere speed. "Marcus, I'm seeing 2 bigger ships in that group," she said. "They don't match the others." Marcus's voice, when it came, carried a new weight of concern. "Heavy cruisers. Those will have real armor, real shields, real weapons, not just fast little raiders looking for easy targets. If those 2 get in close, our shields will not hold the way they did against a single lucky hit. We need a plan, not just courage." Dax's voice crackled over the comm, tight with fear. "Elena, whatever you did out there, it worked. But it also made them very interested in the vanguard. Sensors show at least 6 ships changing course toward your position. I do not think 2 people and a handful of scrapyard workers can hold off 6 Dominion warships." "We don't have a choice," Elena said, though her own confidence had begun to waver in the face of those numbers. "There's no time to retreat, and nowhere to retreat to. This is our position. We hold it, or the whole station falls." Marcus's voice came back steady and calm, the voice of a man who had faced worse odds before and lived to tell about it. "Then we hold it. Gret, I need shields back to full as fast as you can manage. Wisps, check every weapon system on this ship, not just the 2 we have already used. If there is anything else that can fire, I want it ready. Elena, keep us moving. Keep us hard to hit. And trust this old hull to do what it was built to do." "What kind of plan?" Elena asked. "We have 2 working cannons, and a hull that can take 1 good hit at a time. That's not exactly a fleet." "No," Marcus agreed. "But we have something they do not expect. They think this ship is what it looks like. Old, slow, and weak. Every ship we have faced so far has come at us like we were an easy kill, and every one of them paid for that mistake. If we keep using the terrain, keep using the wreckage in this scrapyard, we can make 6 ships fight us 1 or 2 at a time instead of all together. Elena, can you get us into the debris field? The old ship rose near Sector 4. Elena studied the sensor map, spotting the long lines of dead ships still chained in their rows, the same rows she had walked through cataloging scrap just days earlier. It was a wild idea, flying a warship through a graveyard of broken hulls, but it might work exactly because no sane pilot would attempt it. "I can try," she said. "It's going to be close. Some of those gaps are barely wider than we are." "Then fly carefully," Marcus said, "because if you scrape us against a dead freighter, the Dominion will not even need to fire a shot." Elena guided the vanguard toward the nearest row of wrecked ships, weaving between the hulking silhouettes of long-dead vessels, using their mass to break sensor lock and block direct lines of fire. It was slow, careful work, the old ship's engines straining with every tight turn, but it bought them precious seconds as the Dominion formation was forced to split apart to follow. "And if 6 ships is too many?" Elena asked, unable to stop the question from slipping out. There was a brief silence on the comm before Marcus answered, his voice quieter but no less certain. "Then we make sure it costs them everything they have got. And we make sure New Helios remembers that somebody stood and fought for them, even at the very end. But I do not plan on losing today, Elena. Not after waiting 40 years to hear this ship's engines running again. Not today." Elena took a slow breath and looked around the small, cramped bridge, at the worn switches and faded labels, at a room built by people who had faced impossible odds 82 years ago and refused to give up. She thought about Marcus's stories, about the friend he had lost on the gunnery deck, about a crew who had bled for this ship long before she was even born. She thought about the plaque near the engine room, and the names she had read there without knowing why they mattered. "Marcus," she said quietly over the comm. "Why did you really come back today? You could have just let them melt it down. You didn't have to be here for this." There was a pause before he answered, his voice softer now than she had heard it all day. "Because some things deserve better than being forgotten, Elena. This ship gave everything it had to keep people safe once, and nobody remembered to say thank you. I figured somebody should be here, at the end, to make sure it did not go quietly. I did not expect the end to look like this. I did not expect a beginning instead." Gret's voice cut through the comm, flat and urgent despite the translation. 6 ships, closing fast, weapons charged. Marcus's tone shifted instantly back to business, the soft moment passing as quickly as it had come. "Then let's give this old girl one more chance to prove what she is made of. Elena, full power to engines. Gret, everything you have got into shields. We are not going down without making them remember our name." Outside, the 6 Dominion warships drew closer, their weapon ports glowing bright with charging energy, bearing down on the old, scarred, gray ship that stood alone between them and the shattered remains of Kessel's drift. The Vanguard slid between 2 massive dead freighters, their broken hulls looming like canyon walls on either side, and Elena felt the ship's own hull scrape faintly against a piece of trailing debris. She winced but kept moving, watching the sensor display as the 6 pursuing Dominion ships were forced to break formation, unable to fit through the same narrow gap all at once. "2 of them are following us into the wreck field," Marcus reported. "The other 4 are splitting off, trying to come around from the other side. The heavy cruisers are hanging back, letting the smaller ships probe first." "Smart," Elena muttered. "They're not going to waste their strongest ships on a maze they don't understand." She glanced at the sensor readout again, watching the 2 heavy cruisers hang back near the edge of the wreck field, patient and unhurried, like predators, content to let smaller animals do the tiring work first. It was, in a strange way, more unsettling than an aggressive charge would have been. It meant the Dominion commanders were not panicking. They were adjusting, learning, treating the Vanguard as a genuine threat rather than a curiosity to be swatted aside. "Then we make sure the ones who do come in regret it," Marcus said. "Cannon 1 is charged. Bring us around the next wreck, Elena, and give me an angle on whoever is closest." Elena guided the ship through another tight turn, the hull groaning in protest, and spotted one of the pursuing cruisers emerging from behind a wrecked mining barge just ahead. She held the ship steady for the half-second Marcus needed. The cannon fired, and the shot struck true, tearing through the cruiser's weakened shields and sending it spinning off into the side of another dead ship with a shower of sparks. It did not explode, but it clearly was not continuing the chase either, its systems flickering and dark as it drifted away. Elena felt a small, fierce satisfaction watching it go, quickly followed by a flicker of guilt she had not expected. She did not know how many crew members had been aboard that ship, whether any of them had been hurt, whether this was truly a fight she had any right feeling proud of winning. She pushed the thought aside for later. There was no time for it now, and the Dominion fleet had shown no such hesitation in their own attacks on New Helios. "One down, sort of," Marcus said. "Where's the second one?" Before Elena could answer, the sensor display lit up with a new warning, and she felt the ship shudder from an impact she had not seen coming. The second pursuing cruiser had used the wreckage to sneak up from an angle their sensors had not covered, firing at close range before the Vanguard's shields could fully recharge. "Shields down to 10%, Gret reported grimly. "Hull holding. Barely." "They learned from the first 2 ships we hit," Marcus said, a note of grudging respect in his voice. "No more head-on attacks. They're using our own tactic against us now, hiding in the wreckage." Elena's hands moved instinctively, pulling the ship into a tight spin that put a dead satellite hull between them and their attacker, buying a few precious seconds. "2 can play that game," she said, though her voice shook with the effort of controlling the old ship's sluggish response. "Marcus, I need another shot lined up. Can you charge Cannon 2 faster?" "I'm trying," Marcus said, and she could hear real strain in his voice now, the sound of a man pushing decades-old machinery, well past what it had been designed to handle continuously. This ship was not built to fire this many shots this quickly. The capacitors need time to recharge properly, or we risk burning out the whole system. "We don't have time," Elena said. "I know," Marcus replied. "Give me 30 seconds, I'll find a way." Down on the gunnery deck, Marcus tore open a secondary access panel beside the cannon controls, exposing a tangle of old capacitor coils that had not been serviced in over a decade. He worked quickly, rerouting power from a non-essential system, his fingers moving with the sure, practiced speed of a man who had once done this exact repair under enemy fire, decades ago, though his memory of it had faded, until this very moment forced it back to the surface. "Come on," he muttered under his breath, echoing the same words Elena had used earlier in a different room, on a different console, both of them speaking to the same tired old machine, as though it could hear them and choose to help. Elena spent those 30 seconds weaving the vanguard through the wreckage as best she could, using every trick she had learned in the last hour, every instinct that had somehow developed in the space of a single desperate battle. The pursuing cruiser stayed close behind, firing whenever it caught a clear angle, each near miss close enough to rattle the whole ship. Then, from the comm channel connected to the station itself, Dax's voice broke through, tight with urgency. "Elena, the shelter bay has picked up something on long-range sensors. A ship, coming in fast from the direction of New Helios, not Dominion. I don't recognize the configuration." "Friend or enemy?" Elena asked, not daring to hope. "Unknown," Dax said. "It is broadcasting an old distress beacon response code, something from before my time running this station. If it is legitimate, it might be responding to the same emergency signal we sent out when the attack started." Marcus's voice cut in, sharp with sudden recognition. "Distress beacon response code. Elena, that's a human military frequency, an old one, from before the Alliance treaties standardized everything. Whoever that is, they're flying human hardware, or something built to talk to it." The mystery ship grew closer on the sensor display, and as it entered visual range, Elena's breath caught in her throat. It was not a Dominion vessel, and it was not one of Earth's modern, sleek warships either. It was old, boxy, painted in faded desert colors, with weapon mounts bristling along its hull in a way that looked almost aggressive compared to the polite designs of current human military ships. "That's a Reclaimer-class salvage cruiser," Marcus said, disbelief plain in his voice. "Those were built right around the same time as the Vanguard, repurposed after the war for deep salvage work in dangerous unclaimed space. I did not think any of them were still flying." Elena watched the boxy old ship close the distance with surprising speed, its weathered hull covered in the scars of countless salvage jobs in dangerous unclaimed territory, patched in places with metal that clearly did not match the original plating. It looked nothing like a proper warship, and yet something about the way it moved, confident and unhesitating, told her its crew knew exactly what they were doing. The newcomer opened fire on the Dominion cruiser, still pursuing the Vanguard, catching it by surprise from an angle it had not been watching, and the enemy ship's shields collapsed under the sudden combined assault. It broke off immediately, retreating back toward the main Dominion formation, clearly unwilling to fight two old, unpredictable ships at once. A voice came through on an open channel, gruff and accented, belonging to someone who sounded like they had spent a lifetime working in deep space, far from polite society. "This is Captain Okoye, of the salvage vessel Rustrunner. Heard your distress call, and figured you could use a hand. Didn't expect to find the old Vanguard still flying, though. Thought that girl got sold for scrap years back." "She almost was," Elena answered, still catching her breath. "We reactivated her about an hour ago, right in the middle of all this. I'm Elena Voss, station worker at Kessel's Drift. This is Marcus Reyes, former Vanguard crew." "Marcus Reyes," Okoye repeated, and something like recognition crept into her voice. "I've heard stories about you, old man. Didn't think I'd ever see you standing on that bridge again." "Neither did I," Marcus said. "Glad to have you here, Captain. We could use the help. Dominion fleet has us badly outnumbered." "Story of my life," Okoye said. "Salvage crews learn to fight dirty, using whatever we've got. Same as it sounds like you're doing. I've got a crew of 8 aboard, decent weapons, and a ship almost as stubborn as yours. Let's see if 2 old relics can teach these Dominion pups some manners." "How did you even pick up our distress call all the way out here?" Elena asked, still slightly stunned by the sudden arrival. "Old habit," Okoye said. "Ships like mine keep listening on frequencies most modern fleets forgot even existed. When you sent that signal on the Vanguard's original wartime channel, half the salvage crews and old ship owners in this sector probably heard it, whether they admit to listening or not. Word travels fast among people who spend their lives keeping forgotten machines running. We look out for our own, Miss Voss, even when the rest of the galaxy has moved on without us." With the Rust Runner now fighting alongside them, the balance of the battle began to shift, if only slightly. The two old ships worked well together, both built in an era that valued toughness over elegance, both crewed by people who understood how to squeeze every last bit of performance out of aging systems. They moved through the wreckage field in a rough, coordinated pattern, drawing Dominion ships into ambushes among the dead hulls, using the scrapyard's own graveyard of forgotten vessels as a weapon in its own right. Elena found herself grinning, despite the exhaustion pulling at her limbs, watching the two mismatched old ships weave through the wreckage together, like partners who had rehearsed the dance for years, even though they had only just met. There was something deeply satisfying about it, something that felt like more than simple survival. It felt like proof of something she had not been able to name until now, a quiet stubbornness shared by every old, forgotten thing that refused to accept the label the galaxy had given it. But the two heavy cruisers Marcus had warned about earlier had finally grown tired of waiting. They advanced together, moving with the slow, deliberate confidence of ships that knew they could absorb far more punishment than the fast raiders that had come before them. Their weapon batteries alone dwarfed anything the smaller ships carried, and their approach sent a fresh wave of dread through everyone aboard the Vanguard. "Those two are the real threat," Marcus said, his voice grim as he studied the readouts. "Everything we've fought so far has been probing attacks, testing our strength. This is the Dominion, sending in ships built to finish the job properly." "Can the Rust Runner help against something that size?" Elena asked. Okoye's voice crackled back, and for the first time, some of the confidence had drained from it. "Those cruisers outgun both our ships combined, easily. We might slow them down, but stopping them outright. That's a tall order for two old relics and a handful of desperate crew." Elena watched the two massive shapes drift closer, their hulls thick with layered armor plating, their weapon batteries far larger than anything either the Vanguard or the Rust Runner carried. She thought about the wide fields of New Helios, about her father, about every family sheltering in Kessel's Drift's cramped shelter bay, with nothing but a station's thin walls between them and destruction. She thought, too, about how close this ship had come to being melted down before any of this even began, and how strange it was that its very last day might also be its most important one. "There has to be something," she said, more to herself than to anyone listening. "There's always something." Elena felt her stomach twist with fear, but before she could respond, Dax's voice broke through on the comm again, this time carrying a different kind of urgency, something closer to disbelief than panic. "Elena, you need to see this. Long-range sensors are picking up more ships, a lot more, coming from the direction of the Alliance border. They're broadcasting Alliance fleet transponder codes." "The Alliance fleet?" Elena breathed. "They came?" "I don't know," Dax said. "The numbers don't match what we know of the nearest Alliance patrol group. This is a much larger force than what should be stationed anywhere near here. I'm trying to get a clearer reading now." Elena counted the growing number of contacts on the sensor display, her disbelief growing with every new ship that appeared. 10, 20, more than 30, and still climbing. An entire scattered fleet of old, mismatched vessels, converging on a single point from every direction, as though the whole sector had been waiting for exactly this moment, waiting for a reason to remember what they used to be. As the new fleet drew closer, its ships became visible on the Vanguard's sensor display, and Marcus let out a sound that was half laugh, half disbelieving gasp. "Those aren't standard Alliance configurations," he said. "Elena, look closer. Some of those ship profiles, I recognize a few of them. Older designs, retrofitted, definitely not fresh off an Alliance shipyard." Elena stared at the growing cluster of ships on the display, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. They were not sleek and modern like the Alliance fleet was supposed to look. They were varied, mismatched, clearly built and rebuilt many times over by many different hands. "Marcus," she said slowly, a strange hope building in her chest. "Are those other old ships?" She counted more contacts appearing on the display with every passing second, ships of every shape and size, some clearly military in origin, others looking more like converted freighters, or mining vessels fitted with weapons that did not quite match their hulls. It was the strangest fleet she had ever seen, nothing like the neat, matching formations she had watched in Alliance parade broadcasts. It looked more like a family reunion of forgotten things, all answering the same call at once. Marcus's voice, when it came, was thick with emotion he did not bother to hide. I think they might be. Elena, when word went out that the Vanguard had been reactivated and was fighting the Dominion, do you know how many other old crews, other old ship owners, other collectors and salvagers and stubborn veterans might have been listening? People like Okoye, keeping old military hardware running out here, on the edge of everything, because nobody else wanted it anymore. If they heard a distress call go out from this ship, using an old wartime frequency, they'd come, Elena finished, understanding flooding through her. Because this ship means something to them too. Okoye's voice crackled back over the comm, warm with something like pride. You'd be surprised how many of us are still out here, Miss Voss. Old crews, old collectors, folks who kept a piece of history running long after everyone told us it was pointless. We don't get called on much. Feels good to be needed again. Marcus was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice had a rough edge to it that had nothing to do with the battle. 40 years, I told myself, nobody remembered what this ship meant. Turns out, I was just talking to the wrong people. The approaching fleet, ragged and mismatched as it was, began fanning out to engage the Dominion forces still bearing down on New Helios and the scrapyard. Dozens of old, forgotten, supposedly obsolete ships suddenly filling the battlefield with weapons fire and stubborn defiance. The two heavy Dominion cruisers, which had been advancing with such confidence only moments before, slowed their approach, clearly recalculating the odds, now that the battlefield had changed so dramatically. Elena watched the enemy formation on the sensor display, trying to imagine what it must look like from the other side. A single strange old warship had already knocked out 3 of their ships and forced 2 heavy cruisers into caution. Now that ship had somehow summoned dozens more of its kind, seemingly out of nowhere, all of them just as stubborn, just as unwilling to simply lie down and die. It was, she thought, exactly the kind of thing that would make an enemy commander start doubting everything they thought they knew about an opponent. They're hesitating, Elena said, watching the enemy formation shift uncertainly on the display. Good, Marcus said, a fierce grin audible in his voice, even without seeing his face. Let them hesitate. Let them wonder how many more surprises we have waiting. Elena, bring us in close. If the Vanguard is going to fight alongside every other forgotten ship in this sector, I want us leading the charge, not hiding behind it. Elena eased the ship forward, out of the tangled wreckage that had sheltered them for the last several minutes, into open space, where the full scale of the gathering battle became clear. Dozens of old ships, human and otherwise, streamed past the Vanguard's hull, engines glowing bright, as they raced to intercept Dominion vessels, still pressing their attack on New Helios. Weapons fire lit up the darkness in every direction, a chaotic storm of light that should have looked terrifying and instead, somehow, looked like hope. Captain Okoye, Marcus said over the open comm, the Vanguard is taking point. Anyone flying an old hull who can hear this, form up on us. Let's remind the Dominion why nobody used to mess with ships like ours. A chorus of voices answered, some human, some clearly alien, all carrying the same rough, weathered confidence of crews who had spent years keeping forgotten machines alive against every expectation. One by one, the scattered fleet began to organize itself around the Vanguard's position, an unlikely armada of relics falling into a formation nobody had planned or rehearsed, held together by nothing more than shared stubbornness and a distress call sent out on a frequency the galaxy had almost forgotten existed. Ahead of them, the 2 Dominion heavy cruisers finally began to retreat, falling back toward the main body of their fleet near New Helios, no longer willing to face an enemy force, whose true size and strength they could no longer calculate with any confidence. It was not a victory yet, not by a long distance, but for the first time since the attack began, Elena allowed herself to believe they might actually survive this day. They're pulling back, she said, disbelief and relief mixing in her voice. For now, Marcus said, his tone still cautious, despite the small victory. New Helios is still under heavy attack, and the main Dominion fleet has not even begun to feel real pressure yet. This is not over, Elena, not by a long way, but it is, for the first time today, a fight we might actually be able to win. The battle around New Helios had grown into something far larger than anyone at Kessel's Drift could have imagined, just hours earlier. The Dominion fleet, still numbering in the dozens, pressed hard against the colony's few remaining defense platforms, while the ragged armada of old ships that had answered the Vanguard's distress call spread out across the battlefield, striking wherever they could, using every trick their crews had learned over decades of keeping forgotten machines alive. Elena guided the Vanguard through the chaos, following Marcus's directions as he called out targets from the gunnery deck, the old ship's 2 working cannons firing again and again at any Dominion vessel that came within range. The rhythm of it had become almost familiar now, a strange kind of dance between fear and focus that left no room for anything else. "New Helios Control is hailing us," Gret's translated voice announced suddenly. "Priority channel." "Put it through," Marcus said. A new voice filled the bridge, tired and strained, but carrying the unmistakable authority of someone used to giving orders. "This is Colonial Defense Coordinator Amara Singh, New Helios. Whoever is flying that old warship, you have bought us time we did not think we would get. Our last defense platform just went offline. We have nothing left up here but a handful of civilian shuttles, trying to get people off the surface. If the Dominion breaks through what's left of your line, they will have a clear run at the evacuation ships." Elena felt her stomach tighten. "How many people are still trying to evacuate?" "Thousands," Singh said. "The shuttles are slow, and there are not enough of them. We need at least 20 more minutes to get everyone who can be gotten out actually out. I do not know if you have 20 minutes to give us, but I am asking anyway, because I have nothing else left to ask with." Marcus's voice came back steady and certain. "You'll have your 20 minutes, Coordinator. Elena, plot a course toward the evacuation corridor. If the Dominion wants through, they're going to have to go through us first. Us and about 30 other stubborn old ships," Okoye's voice added over the comm, somewhere nearby in the chaos. "Rust Runner is with you, Vanguard. Lead the way." Elena pushed the Vanguard forward, the old ship groaning as it picked up speed, heading toward the wide corridor of space, where dozens of civilian shuttles were struggling to escape New Helios's burning surface. Around her, the ragged fleet of old ships began to form up, human and alien vessels alike, all falling into a rough line between the fleeing shuttles and the advancing Dominion warships. It was, Elena thought, the strangest army she had ever seen. Boxy salvage cruisers flew alongside sleek but battered alien freighters, retrofitted with weapons. An ancient mining vessel, with makeshift armor plates welded haphazardly across its hull, drifted near a small formation of what looked like retired Alliance patrol boats. Their once proud colors faded to gray. None of them matched. None of them looked like they belonged in the same fleet. And yet here they all were, standing together against an enemy that outnumbered and outgunned every single one of them. The Dominion fleet, seeing this strange wall of old ships forming between them and the fleeing shuttles, did not hesitate for long. A wave of warships broke off from the main assault on New Helios and turned toward the new threat, weapons charging, clearly intent on smashing through the makeshift blockade as quickly as possible. "Here they come," Elena said, watching the enemy formation surge forward on the sensor display. "Then let's welcome them properly," Marcus said. "Cannon 1, charged. Elena, keep us moving. Do not let them get a clean shot." The battle that followed was unlike anything Elena had experienced in her life. A swirling, chaotic mess of weapons fire and desperate maneuvers, ships weaving between each other in a fight that had no clear lines, no clean formations, nothing but raw determination holding the defensive line together. She lost track of how many times the Vanguard took a hit, how many times Gret's voice crackled over the comm with warnings about failing shields or damaged systems. She lost track of how many shots Marcus fired, how many enemy ships peeled away damaged or destroyed, replaced almost immediately by more Dominion vessels pressing the attack. At some point, a Dominion cruiser broke through the line entirely, slipping past a damaged salvage ship that had been forced to retreat, and made a straight run toward the fleeing shuttles. Elena saw it happening on the sensor display and felt her heart stop. "Marcus, we have a leaker, heading straight for the shuttles." "I see it," Marcus said, his voice tight. "We're too far to intercept in time." "Then we make time," Elena said, and pushed the Vanguard's engines past every safe limit Marcus had warned her about, ignoring the alarms blaring across her console as the old ship strained to accelerate faster than it had in 82 years. The hull shook violently, metal groaning under stress it had not been designed to handle, but the ship held together, surging forward on a desperate intercept course. They would not reach the cruiser in time to stop it, before it reached firing range of the shuttles. Elena understood that with cold, terrible clarity, even as she pushed the engines harder, but they might reach it in time to draw its attention, to become a threat too immediate to ignore. "Fire everything we've got," she said. "Make them look at us instead." Marcus did not hesitate. Both cannons fired in quick succession, the shots crossing the distance and striking the Dominion cruiser's rear shields just as it prepared to open fire on the nearest shuttle. The cruiser lurched, its course thrown off just enough, its own weapons discharging wide and harmless into empty space, instead of into the fleeing civilians it had been aiming for. The cruiser spun to face this new threat, weapons already charging for a return shot, and Elena realized, with a strange, calm clarity, that the Vanguard's shields were already too weak to survive a direct hit at this range. She had bought the shuttles their safety by putting her own ship directly in harm's way, and there was no more wreckage nearby to hide behind, no clever trick left to try. "Brace," she said quietly, gripping the controls, refusing to look away from the enemy ship, even as its weapons finished charging. The shot never came. A streak of bright energy tore across the battlefield from an unexpected angle, striking the Dominion cruiser before it could fire, and the ship staggered, its weapons discharge scattering harmlessly, as its systems overloaded from the sudden impact. Elena watched, stunned, as a new ship swept past the Vanguard's bow, larger and sleeker than any of the old relics that had answered the distress call, its hull marked with the clean, modern lines of Earth's current military. "This is Captain Aiko Tanaka, UES Meridian," a crisp, professional voice announced over the comm. "Apologies for the late arrival. Earth Fleet Command finally authorized emergency deployment once they realized the scale of this attack. We have 6 modern cruisers inbound, full weapons and shields. Whoever has been holding this line, you have our deepest gratitude and our support, starting right now." Elena let out a breath she felt like she had been holding for the entire battle. "Captain Tanaka, this is the Vanguard. We are very glad to see you." There was a brief pause on the comm, and when Tanaka spoke again, her voice carried genuine surprise. "The Vanguard? The old first-generation warship? I thought that ship was scrapped years ago." "Almost," Elena said. "We reactivated her about 2 hours ago. She's been holding this sector together ever since." "Almost" is doing a lot of work in that sentence, Tanaka said, and for a moment, there was something almost like a laugh in her clipped, professional tone. "Fleet Command is going to want a full report on this. Reactivating an 82-year-old vessel from cold storage and fighting a sustained engagement with it is not something covered in any training manual I have ever read. Write it up as new doctrine then," Marcus cut in over the comm, his voice rough with exhaustion, but carrying a note of dry humor. "Might save some other old ship from a scrapyard someday." "Understood," Tanaka said, and Elena could hear real respect creeping into her tone now. "Then let's finish what you started. Meridian and escort ships. Target the remaining Dominion cruisers. Priority is protecting the evacuation corridor, and the old fleet holding the line. Nobody who fought this hard today is losing their ship on our watch." With 6 modern, fully armed cruisers joining the fight, the balance of the battle shifted decisively. The Dominion fleet, already battered by hours of stubborn resistance from the ragged old armada, could not withstand the combined pressure of fresh, powerful reinforcements arriving at exactly the moment their advantage had begun to slip away. Ship after ship broke off from the assault, retreating toward the edge of the system, until finally the remaining Dominion commander gave the order for a full withdrawal, abandoning the attack on New Helios entirely. The battle ended not with a final dramatic explosion, but with a slow, quiet realization that the enemy ships had simply stopped coming. Elena sat in the Vanguard's pilot seat, hands trembling on the controls, staring at a sensor display that finally, blessedly, showed no more incoming threats. "They're leaving," she said, hardly believing it. "Marcus, they're actually leaving." There was a long silence from the gunnery deck before Marcus answered, his voice thick with an emotion Elena had never heard from him before. "We held the line," he said quietly. 82 years old, and she held the line. The following hours passed in a blur for Elena. Evacuation shuttles completed their runs safely, carrying the last of New Helios's fleeing colonists to temporary shelter aboard the arriving Earth Fleet ships. Damage crews moved through the wreckage-strewn space around the scrapyard, searching for survivors among both the human and alien ships that had fought and fallen defending the corridor. Captain Tanaka's cruisers established a defensive perimeter, ensuring the Dominion fleet truly had withdrawn and was not simply regrouping for a second attack. Okoye's voice found her once more over the comm, warm and tired. Rustrunner made it through in one piece, more or less. Lost a few sensor arrays and most of our paint, but the crew's all accounted for. Reckon that counts as a good day out here, Miss Voss. A very good day, Elena agreed. Thank you, Captain. We wouldn't have held that line without you. Wouldn't have had a line worth holding without you and that old girl of yours, Okoye replied. Take care of her. Ships like that don't come around twice. Elena finally powered down the Vanguard's engines once the danger had fully passed, sitting alone on the small, worn bridge for a long moment, simply breathing, simply existing in the silence after so many hours of chaos. She thought about the melting crew that had been scheduled to arrive that very morning, about how close this old ship had come to being reduced to raw scrap metal before any of this ever happened. She thought about Marcus, standing in the docking bay just hours ago, saying goodbye to a dying friend, never imagining he would instead be helping that friend save an entire colony world. Marcus found her there a while later, climbing slowly up to the bridge, his face lined with exhaustion, but his eyes brighter than she had seen them since they first met. He lowered himself into the co-pilot's seat beside her, letting out a long, tired sigh. How are you feeling? Elena asked. Old, Marcus said, with a small, tired laugh. Old, and more alive than I have felt in 40 years. How about you? Terrified, Elena admitted. And a little proud, I think. Is that strange? Not strange at all, Marcus said. Oh, that is exactly how I felt the first time this ship survived a battle it should not have won. Some things do not change, no matter how many decades pass between them. 3 days later, Elena stood in the same docking bay where this had all begun, watching a very different scene unfold. The Vanguard sat gleaming under fresh floodlights, its hull scorched and dented but intact, surrounded now not by chains marking it for destruction, but by a small crowd of reporters, colonial officials, and curious onlookers, all eager to see the old ship that had helped save New Helios. Somewhere among the crowd, Elena spotted her father, who had made the trip up from the surface the moment communications had been restored, his farming clothes looking out of place among the polished uniforms of fleet officials. He caught her eye and gave a small, proud wave, and Elena felt something in her chest loosen that had been tight for years, long before the Dominion attack, long before any of this had begun. Dax stood beside her, his 4 arms crossed in a posture that might have been pride, might have been simple relief that his station still existed at all. Earth Fleet Command has already contacted me about the Vanguard, he said. They want to buy it back, officially recognize it as a historical vessel. There is talk of a museum, a proper one this time, with real funding behind it. Good, Elena said. It deserves that. They also want to talk to you, Dax added, a note of amusement creeping into his usually businesslike voice. Something about an offer to join Earth Fleet's engineering corps. Seems reactivating an 82-year-old warship in the middle of a battle and then leading it to victory catches people's attention. Elena looked toward the ship, remembering the moment she had first opened its hatch out of simple curiosity, never imagining where that curiosity would lead. I don't know, she said. I always wanted to build ships, not just take them apart. Maybe it's time I finally did that. Marcus approached from across the docking bay, moving a little slower than before, the accumulated exhaustion of the last 3 days clearly weighing on him, but his expression was calm and content, in a way Elena had not seen since they first met. Colonial Coordinator Singh wants to speak with both of us, he said. Something about a formal commendation, and Captain Tanaka mentioned wanting to discuss keeping the Vanguard active, at least part-time, as a training vessel for new engineers. Apparently Fleet Command was very impressed by how well an old ship performed against modern threats. What do you think? Elena asked. Would you want to keep flying her? Marcus looked up at the old ship, his eyes tracing the familiar lines of a hull he had once thought he would only ever see again in memory. I spent 40 years watching ships like this one get thrown away, one after another, because the galaxy decided old things were not worth the trouble of keeping around, he said. I think it is about time somebody proved that wrong properly, not just for one desperate afternoon, but for good. Yes, Elena. I would very much like to keep flying her, if you will be my co-pilot, that is. Elena smiled, looking up at the scarred, proud old ship that had nearly become scrap metal just days before, now standing as living proof that not everything the galaxy decided to forget deserved to stay forgotten. "I would like that," she said. "I would like that a lot." Word of the battle at New Helios spread quickly through the Alliance and beyond, carried by news broadcasts and word of mouth alike. The story of an ancient, forgotten warship, reactivated by two determined people in the middle of a desperate attack, rallying dozens of other old, discarded vessels to hold the line against a Dominion invasion, became something people wanted to hear again and again. Other old ships, scattered across the galaxy in scrapyards and salvage stations much like Kessel's Drift, found themselves suddenly valuable again, their owners receiving calls from museums, historical societies, and military archives eager to preserve what they had so recently been ready to throw away. The Dominion, for their part, learned a hard lesson that day about underestimating an enemy simply because that enemy's equipment looked old and unimpressive. Reports later suggested their military command had begun reviewing tactics for dealing with unconventional, aging technology, no longer assuming that outdated hardware meant an easy victory. As for the Vanguard, it remained docked at Kessel's Drift only long enough for essential repairs before Earth Fleet Command formally reactivated it, not as a museum piece gathering dust, but as an active training vessel, exactly as Captain Tanaka had suggested. Elena and Marcus stayed aboard as its official crew, joined eventually by Gret, who left his scrapyard job to become the ship's permanent chief mechanic, and by a rotating handful of young cadets, eager to learn from a ship with more real combat experience than any simulator could offer. On quiet evenings, when the ship sat docked and the corridors were calm, Elena sometimes found herself back on the small, worn bridge, sitting in the same chair she had first sat in out of simple curiosity, so many days ago. She would run her hand along the old, familiar controls, thinking about how close this ship had come to disappearing forever, melted down and forgotten, its 82 years of history, reduced to nothing more than raw material, for something nobody would remember. It had not disappeared. It had woken up instead, right when the galaxy needed it most, and in doing so, it had reminded everyone watching, human and alien alike, that being old did not mean being useless, and being forgotten did not mean being worthless. Sometimes, all it took was the right moment, and the right people willing to believe that something everyone else had given up on still had one more fight left inside it. The Vanguard flew on, scarred but proud, no longer humanity's oldest ship gathering dust in a forgotten scrapyard, but humanity's oldest ship still flying, still teaching, still standing ready, should the galaxy ever need it again.